So hi, I'm glad to get the chance to talk to you all, and I figured it would be helpful to start with who I am. Ben alluded to the fact that you had a librarian in your midst, so to speak, yesterday, and that would be me. So my name is Daina Bouquin. I'm the head librarian of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. I am appointed separately through Harvard University and the Smithsonian. So I am Harvard's librarian for astrophysics and the Smithsonian's librarian for astronomy and astrophysics. So sometimes I don't really have much of a picture in my mind, I guess, of what people might associate me with or what they must think I do. But there's like a relatively negative, pretty wrong, very old picture in people's minds sometimes of what a librarian does and what I would do then. And so I thought it would be helpful to kind of point out some of the things that you might be aware of that would give you a little bit more context for the kinds of work that I do, because I'm going to talk to you about metadata. So the better metadata is, the less you know it's there. And so I work with like the group Archive, so the big preprint server for astronomy and physics and astrophysics more broadly. I am part of the team that is the archive for Archive. So I'm on the IT advisory group for that. I work with the American Astronomical Association to figure out how we define what astronomy is. So all of the way that all of the literature is indexed on the ADS. If you know what that is, that means something to you. Basically, all of the astronomy literature stuff happens in my library. The ADS is in my library. I work with the Software Preservation Network, so all of the people who are trying to crawl the internet to make sure all the code that you're writing doesn't disappear into oblivion. We're working on making bots for that. And I work with the Mozilla Foundation, so I'm part of their open leadership program. And so I mentor different groups on how to make their stuff more open and accessible. And as far as my background, sometimes it's a little bit helpful to kind of clarify more why I might have some ethos to provide on a topic. So why am I trustworthy? I do have a background in analytics. I focus on computational math in addition to my work in information science. So I'm here to talk to you from that perspective about a project called MetaSat. And so essentially that is a project where we're trying to define metadata for small satellite missions. And I'll get more into all of the motivations for that, but essentially, before we start talking about like what the project is, I figured I'd tell you some of the people who I'm working with so that you know a little bit more who all else is in the room, even if it's not just like me on a stage. So I'm the PI of MetaSat, and funding is coming from the Sloan Foundation. They are wonderful. And right now, we're working very closely with the Libre Space Foundation, which is a foundation based in Greece that's working on making small satellites much more accessible and all of space much more open. And I'm working with NASA. So Libre Space has already agreed to be our first implementation of the metadata that we defined, so that you'll be able to use their network of open ground stations to schedule satellite missions, and we'll be able to fully and comprehensively describe essentially all of those observations and the artifacts that are tied to them, in addition to the people and the objects within the mission themselves. I'm working with the Office of the Chief Technologist so that what we're doing will be able to be incorporated into NASA use cases and implemented on relevant NASA systems. So all that, I guess, is to say, when I'm talking about metadata, you will probably not know when you're interacting with it. But if you interact with any of the systems that implement it, that's where it'll be manifested. So we're not talking about designing a specific database. I'm not talking about designing some kind of application of any kind. I'm talking about the conceptual framework of semantics. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term semantics, but usually when you hear semantics, the way people use that is kind of like say, oh, it's in semantics. It's just kind of a throwaway. But semantics is an entire field. And so this is a way that we define all of the relationships between what I'm going to refer to as signifiers. So not just words and terms. A degree symbol is a signifier. So what do things mean and what do they stand for in reality? Because different people have different ways of using the same words to mean radically different things. And they just don't have agreement about what anything means, really. And so the only way that you can actually know what someone means when they say something to you is that you use all of the knowledge and all of your world experience and all of the context around you to make meaning of what people are saying to you. It's not just a lookup table in your head where you know what a word means. I got into my Uber just on the way here, and I got in the car, and the driver immediately said, "Oh, happy Peppermint Thursday." I had no idea what was happening. He handed me a peppermint, and apparently this is the long and the short of what Peppermint Thursday is. But Thursday to me has never meant that before, right? So actually tonight, for me, this is Anna Palma Draper's birthday, so the woman who funded the development of the first all-sky survey. So today's her birthday, so happy birthday, Anna. So different people bring completely different meaning to something that can be sometimes seeming relatively simple. And where we put those signifiers, when we decide what something means in a certain context, we put it into something called a lexicon. So you might think of this as a dictionary, where you have, like, this is our list of appropriate ways we know a thing. But different branches of knowledge can have totally different lexicons. So in astronomy, when I say observer, that means something specific. I am a non-observer in astronomy. This doesn't mean I'm not observant, though. And so, like, different contexts can be needed for the same words in a given lexicon. So all of our signifiers can get gathered up into a particular context, and then we use that to interpret each other. And because we're humans and we're not robots, we're really smart. So computers are really dumb. They only know what you tell them. And so we're making all of these connections constantly. And machine learning and artificial intelligence, we're trying to emulate basically that behavior by creating all of the known signifier relationships and trying to get a computer to figure out the ones that we didn't tell it. Okay? So when I say I want to make metadata for a mission, what do I mean? So for space missions, because mission can mean a lot of things. So when you say it's a mission, I just looked up, like, what is the kind of base of what that means to most people? So it's an important or complex assignment. In this case, typically involving travel. So it's a thing we're going to go do. It's an assignment. It's a task to be carried out. But it can also be a feeling, so a calling, an aim. It's something that a group decides matters, and so we're going to go carry it out. So you can have a diplomatic mission. You don't always have a space mission. You're not always going on a journey. But you have something you need to do because it's important. And it's also sometimes a body of people. It's a group. So you can have a mission. You can have a religious mission. You can have a mission established someplace. It's a group of people who have come together, and they have a task that they carry out because they've decided is important. So mission can mean many, many things, and sometimes it's all of the things. So usually we're not trying to tweeze out in our minds one of those meanings, right? Because the word conveys a lot, and we only know what is being conveyed by the context. And so this is actually a picture. I want to make this bigger. Yay! So hopefully you can actually read that then. So this is an image from 1998. This is the Mars Climate Orbiter undergoing some acoustic testing. Thank you, NASA, for the image rights. This is a group of people with an important assignment. They are sacrificing to do it. This is a very expensive task, I expect. They're all working together on something that is groundbreaking. Let's do something interesting. Let's leave the planet and find something out new about something that only, I don't know, 1,000 years ago we didn't know existed. But it can mean something else too. So the Mars Climate Orbiter, I don't know if you all know this story, but essentially this mission was lost. And we have a bunch of really fun alliterative headlines. So, metric math mistake muffled Mars meteorology mission. So essentially what happened was, despite this really important mission, these huge investments, this whole group of people sending this thing to Mars to learn more about the climate of another world, all of that mattered a lot, but still mistakes can be made because communication is hard. Communication is hard. Conveying meaning is hard. Essentially, impulse from thrusters was being communicated by software in feet and pounds. But the tool that was meant to interpret the thrust was expecting that information in kilograms and in meters, right? And so what happened was a miscommunication in systems, among people in this big group, because the details matter, the semantics matter. And even if they're speaking different languages, the software is dumb. It didn't know that it was talking in different languages, right? And so this put the orbiter into a lower orbit and it was lost. Okay, so now the mission is radically different, right? And we need to learn from this. So metadata matters, communication is difficult, and meaning changes. This was the only image acquired by the orbiter. Right? I see some giggling. So September 7th, 1999, this picture was taken. What does it mean? Who would I ask? Will it ever mean something else? It won't mean anything if I don't give you context. If I didn't tell you anything about the MCO, this would not have any significance to you. It's a smudge in a void, okay? And so this is gonna mean very different things to people throughout history now. So this is a failure. It's also an amazing achievement when you think about it. So what is this? How do we make sure people can learn from it? This isn't something that I can objectively define and say this is what this image means. It's gonna mean different things to different people, and we need to make sure that the types of questions that we know people are going to ask, we give them the capacity to ask those things and find answers. And as new meaning is needed, we need to be able to attach that meaning to these objects, because we can't anticipate all the questions people will ask. So that's where metadata comes in. Metadata is structural, it's descriptive, it's administrative. It's all the things that you don't necessarily understand that you're interacting with all the time. When you ask Google a dumb question, it will still give you a good answer. You can ask Google who the King of the United States is, and it will tell you who the president is. Why is that? It's not magic. It's that people have defined relationships between all of these signifiers, put them into a lexicon that then Google's appliance can crawl through. It's the knowledge graph. So when we say the United States and we say is, we know that we're not talking about in the past, we know we're talking about today, because someone has said that's what is means. When we know the United States, we know that king is an invalid operand there. However, we do know that the king implies the form of governance, but we are not a monarchy. So we can look up in our lexicon what is the valid governance structure and who is the sovereign equivalent in the United States. So we're going to get a good answer, and it's going to like automatically pop up, and the thing that it's going to use to pull that information is probably Wikidata, because that's the stuff that's indexed most highly, because that's what most people contribute to, but that's people going in and editing Wikipedia and adding new meanings to stuff. Nothing about this is magical. And when we want to operationalize the thing that we want to be able to search through, we take all of those elements in our lexicon, all of those signifiers, and we map them structurally into a framework that is called a schema. This is where stuff is recorded. And so when I say I want to make a metadata schema for satellite missions, I want to create that structure that then has all of the meaning implied in it operationally defined so other people can crawl through it and we can add new signifiers as they come. So think of this like a recipe card. And if your recipe right now, you don't need to know what kind of oven you need to make your food, great, there's no element for that. But later you might need it, so there should totally be a way to add that field, right? And if the thing that I'm studying is not the food and I don't want to make the food and I want to know the country that the food's origins are from, does my template have that? So we don't know what kinds of questions people will ask. So we need to create a logical framework that is extensible. So here's another image. Everything that is the only thing of something was the first thing at some point. So this is an image I have in my collection. It's great. It's beautiful. It's a gorgeous little thing. It's the earliest image ever taken of the moon. So for a little while, this was the only image of the moon. So this was taken by Samuel Humphrey. It was a technological innovation that started a revolution. This blew people's minds. You can take photos. So this is a daguerreotype, actually, and it's an experiment. So you can see, if you squint, I'm sorry, those of you who might not be able to see this well, my slides are online, but essentially there's timing written down the side of this daguerreotype. This was an experiment. This is the first time they're trying to capture a crisp image using daguerreotyping as a medium. So this is an incredibly noxious process. You basically have to hold your silver over a vat of boiling mercury to expose your image. People died because of the need to make images like this. This is a radical revolution when you think about what photography has given us. Now it's art, though. I loaned this summer to the Met Museum because it's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. I shipped this with an art dealer. The meaning of things changes dramatically. These are Galileos Notes. I also have these. So it's chicken scratch. Total scribbles. Now they're priceless objects, though. At the time, he did not know, but he's basically the father of observational astronomy, and his notes are seen as the origin of the scientific method. Although his work was done way later than Copernicus's work, like 60 some odd years, his is the stuff that got burned. He's the one who got in prison for life. And it's because he took notes. It's because other people could replicate what he did. And he was teaching people how. Copernicus wrote a book in a time when almost everyone was illiterate, and he didn't say how he got his answers. So, meaning changes. So, essentially, meaning is just collective agreement about something at a particular time. We just decide as a hive mind that this is what we agree on. But it means it's not static. And so you can't rely anymore on human readable metadata to scale. So this is my little image. This is it on my desk. And this is a search. I just searched for Humphrey, the person who took it. And I came up with two things. And so not just this view of the moon, multiple exposures, beautiful little object, but he was also the person who started the first photography journal ever. So the Daguerrean journal. And I didn't have to know that to find that, because that's how metadata works. And the more that we rely on moving away from these physical objects, and I'm not the steward, people are not giving me their things to be curated anymore. I can't answer someone's question to say, is this on my desk or in a vault right now? I can't do that with all things. And we're never going to be able to again. So we need machine actionable metadata. Because signifiers mean different things to different people. So if I zoom in here, I don't know if I can zoom it any further, but basically there's a line up there that says dimensions, :6th plate. So in the land of the history of photography, 6th plate is a dimension. But that doesn't mean anything to you if you're not in this context, right? And so We also have, interestingly here, I want to point out, but it's hard to read. Basically, there's two fields, one for the journal and one for my daguerreotype. They both say author, creator, and they both list this person, Humphrey, but they list him very differently. So in one case, he's the photographer. In another, he's Humphrey, S.D, Samuel Dwight, and then it lists his birthday, which is a little odd when you think about it, but that's what it is. And because we can't have absolute agreement on things, and I want to be able to find out that Humphrey was also the founder of this journal and not just the photographer in this image, I want to be able to find that out without having to have everyone agree with me, right? So what we do is we crosswalk. So in metadata terms, crosswalking is basically the translation from one lexicon to another. You wanted to say this person's name this way, and then we come up with machine actionable tools that make it so you can say, I mean the same thing that you mean, but I'm not using this term the same way you are. So schema.org elements, like I never am going to describe what author is, right, as a term. I'm just going to map to someone else's really good definition of it. And so we need to prevent mission failure. We need to do better. And we need things to be machine actionable. So these are just like little snapshots from Wikipedia, where you can see essentially the Mars Climate Orbiter was before called the Mars Surveyor 98 Orbiter. I've got the Mars Observer as another alternate name for it, and we have a description of an instrument called the Pressure Modulator Infrared Radiometer, but it's also the PMIRR. Dimensions mean something radically different in this context because sixth plate would be nonsense. And we also just have typos. So when you look at spacecraft weight, this is from the official report. It's missing an S on pounds. So we need to make this us-proof. So what is a mission? Why is there a mission? Who takes a mission on? I would like to live in a world where we have the capacity to learn from each other without having to agree with each other. And I would like to be able to add new meaning to things, because all of these things are going to be history by nature of being in this room. You are doing something interesting, different, and new that the world will see very differently later. And so I want to be able to describe the pieces, the hardware, the data, the people, the software, and I want to put that together with you. So we're starting to do that. We have a couple of very constrained use cases. We're really just getting started with this. But you can essentially participate in this thought experiment. So we have a couple of implementation cases, and we certainly have not gone down the crazy rabbit hole that I know we will be on in the next 6 to 8 months. But I can't pick when the conference is. So if you go to schema.space, there are a couple of different ways that you can contribute your ideas to how I might describe a space mission, because some of the things that you're doing might come up in those contexts. The first thing you can do is you can go to GitLab and just make an issue and yell at me about how I'm wrong about something. I'd appreciate if you did that kindly. You're allowed to be loud, though. And the other thing we have is this thing we're calling our sorting tool. Because most of the time, you won't know you're interacting with metadata, and I don't expect you to. So this is not your job, and it never has been, but we're operating in a new world, guys. And so you have to care for us to be able to do this accurately. There's all sorts of problems right now in how we define everything. And the more input and the more diverse perspectives you can get in these contexts, the less bias you ingrain in everything you're trying to do. So I guess my take-home message is metadata is not neutral. Please don't let people define what everything means about you. Your contribution matters a lot. So with my last couple of minutes then, I figured what I could do is at the very least maybe show you how this thing works, because essentially all I want you to be able to do is pick like mission, click expand all. You can see what we're thinking about. You can tell me I'm wrong by basically saying something like, I think orbital parameters should be part of mission service category. You're missing comms. Adds a node. Goes up here. You don't have the thing that I want, so I'm going to put it with people because I think there should be comms people. I think that mission description is dumb, so I'm going to put it over at orphans. It's pretty easy to play around with me with this. And if you click show feedback form, you can enter your name. You can tell me a message, confirm for me that you're not a robot, and this will send me a JSON file with all of your ideas so that we can discuss them then on GitLab and incorporate them into changes we want to make. But this is not the kind of thing that will result in some absolute understanding of what a mission is, because it can't. Metadata needs to evolve, just like any other lexicon does. And so I would appreciate your contributions now as we get started, but later, as you come across anyone else who you think might have something to say. So thank you for your time.
Okay, we have a couple minutes for questions, if anybody in the audience has questions.
Most of the times that you do a lexicon and these sort of things, they're absolute, at least in some sort of version. What if you have competing fields that need to be merged, et cetera, or there are uncertainties, or of course, your universe is always open, but eventually you've got to close it to do something with it. How are you going to deal with the probability or the uncertainty in some of those values?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing right now is establishing a much more clear governance structure. So the idea would be that as we do a stable release, so at a certain point, you aggregate it up enough changes that you all kind of have consensus about, that you think can be the foundation of where you go next. You release a stable version of your schema, and then we also have what we're calling our staged releases. So as we're making changes and committing to them, those will be incorporated into the diagram that you see, but those will not yet be bundled into a new stable release. So those will be for constant discussion. And the other thing about agreement, because we don't need agreement, is that nothing precludes you from changing this. Schemas, as opposed to standards, are optional. They are guidance. You implement this how you want. It's meant to be a tool for others. We're not saying that you need to be compliant with anything. And if you decide that you want to use a different kind of units, but your thing means the same thing, ideally we just have a field where you can define the units that you're using. And if your way of describing something, like Humphrey, my photographer, you want to use a different standard to describe who he is, all we're going to have is something called LD, so JSON link data will be able to refer to externally defined standards. So how about identifier? So identifying a spacecraft, there's a lot of different ways you could do that. COSBAR ID, NORAD ID, qubit. I'm not going to tell you which one of those is right. I'm going to tell you which one of those we recommend, the way that you should write it, and if you choose not to, the other options you have available to yourself and how you would define that option within the schema.
Is this framework available for public once you get
Fully open. Yeah, so right now we're doing everything, developing it fully in the open, and happy to answer questions about it. But this is not a standard. It's more in library science what we call authority control. So it's a reference point that you can build off of. Yeah, so the question is about the concept of time and how you incorporate time and the evolution of a term into your construction. Is that correct? Okay. So one example of how we do this might be useful in the Unified Astronomy Thesaurus, which is the vocabulary that I referred to at the beginning that I'm helping build. And so we have the concept of depreciation. So depreciation of terms, or how you might classify something. Pluto is a good example. So Pluto is now a dwarf planet. It is the king of the Kuiper Belt, but it was a planet, right? So we have Pluto does not change the object, but the signifiers that we use to define it have changed. And so we depreciate the previous definition and where it's at in our hierarchy. We used to put Pluto squarely in the planets category. We created a new subcategory now. So the nesting is different. And so we depreciate that use, but it's an alternate use. So it's not invalid, it is just not the preferred term in this context. And so this is used a lot in searching for like medical contexts. If you wanted to call something a myocardial infarction or versus a heart attack, and you wanted to be able to search for all of those things, but you want to look for them in different contexts, some of the ways that you're looking for that thing might not be valid anymore, but you should still be able to find it. So it's about depreciation of terms.
And with that, we're out of time. So let's thank Daina. Thank you very much for being here.